So we're talking with Jonathan Rigsby, author of Drive, Scraping By in Uber's America. Thank you so much for, coming on the show. Like I said, I'm not an avid reader, but I appreciate you sending out the book, and it was very interesting. Before we, kind of dive into the book, give us a little history on you as I say rideshare driver, because I'm pretty sure that's all you did. Maybe you did a little bit more, but that's how I started out, and that's how Larry started out. And now I barely do rideshare. So tell me a little bit of the history of Jonathan.
Yeah, so this book originates with my divorce in 2016. So I was working for the state of Florida, I had a good job, and then I got divorced. And with my household going from two incomes down to one, and then suddenly I've got all these new expenses. I've got alimony, I've got child support, I've got, rent on an apartment by the railroad tracks in a not great part of town. And I just needed some extra money to make ends meet. And like a lot of us, I kept seeing the ads, be your own boss, make your own hours. It started to look real attractive. And at the time, I was still working my day job, working for the state of Florida. And then I was going out at night and I was working at a GameStop in the local mall. And the problem with working retail is that you've got a schedule that's inconsistent, and you've got people that have been there longer than you who need the hours just as bad as you do. And in retail work, if you can get 10, 12 hours a week, that's great as a part-time person, because they don't like to give a lot of part-time work. And there came a point where I was coming home every night and I was eating ramen noodles and grilled cheese sandwiches. And it had been like a month since I had even thought about a vegetable because I just couldn't afford it. And finally, I just said, I got to try something else. So I looked around at other jobs that I could do, and it was, I could find a few things that would pay me a good amount of money, but were only there for a little amount of time, or I could find stuff that paid almost nothing, but that you could get a lot of hours doing. And so neither of those really worked because I had a son at the time. He's 2 years old at the start of this book. And I had days that I needed to be there with him. I needed to be available for my son. And so I needed something that was flexible, had at least decent pay, and where I didn't have someone standing over me going, why do you need to change your schedule around all the time? And so I saw the bonus opportunity at the time. If you signed up to be an Uber driver after a certain number of rides, I got $200 was my sign up bonus. I know it changes all the time, so different people got different things. And I signed up, and it was coming up on Black Friday at GameStop. And I told my manager, I'm really sorry, but I can't do Black Friday again. I've done that in retail before. It's awful. It's miserable. And it just beats you to death. And I said, I'm going to leave and I'm going to try to do this rideshare driver thing. And so Thanksgiving Day came, and that was the first day that I got behind the wheel and turned the app on, was Thanksgiving Day.
Okay.
And that was in 2016.
Yeah, we just had our 200th episode, and Larry and I were trying to think when we started. I think I was in 16. We're in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Larry's in Bowling Green, Kentucky. What year was yours again,
I started
Larry?
in July of 2017.
Okay. So back in the heyday of Uber, at least I feel like that's, it had the multiplier on there, on those weekend nights, like you could make $1,000 on the weekends, at least in my market, without.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had an opportunity to make $1,000 in a weekend.
Really?
I do remember that map with the hexagons though, and
all
of that before they smoothed everything out. So
right. In the book, which I really like in the book, is like, it's not just about gig work or rideshare, it's about your life too, and interjecting it. And I could feel a lot of your pain. You know what I mean? I remember like doing that stuff. Now I didn't have, and Larry's not in the same position. He can speak on that, but we didn't have, you weren't really doing it full time, but you were. But when you were really grinding it out between your daytime job, and you were still almost doing full-time hours, right?
Yeah, so at the beginning, my goal, with the money I needed about $250 a week. And in a college town with college students, when the college students are here Fridays and Saturday nights, college students like to go out. The surge burns real bright. Yep. It's constant surge all the time. And you can bang out $250 in about, 15 hours. But you can't do 15 hours of Friday night. So I sort of picked and choosed when I was going to be out. Well, that worked for a while. And then over the years, as my financial situation went up and down with car repairs and bills and different things, there came a point where I was driving 7 days a week, every single day. I would get up, go to my day job in the morning, and I would bring a duffel bag and a thermos full of coffee, so that by the time I finished work at my day job, I would change clothes in the bathroom, pour myself a cup of coffee, and go right out on the road. And I would
Okay.
drive until 10 or 11 at night. And that was Monday through Thursday. And then on Friday night, the moment I got off of work, I was driving till 2 a.m., which is when bars close here in Tallahassee. And at 2 a.m., I told myself whatever I had done by that point was going to have to be enough. And I would do one more ride that I called my charity ride, which was to take someone home from the bar at 2 a.m. And after
Okay.
that, I forced myself to go home, because at some point you do have to sleep, especially if you've been up since 6:37 in the morning and you've been up and going all day
Yeah.
long.
So you said when you were doing almost 7 days a week, was that still only to earn the 250?
Sometimes I would end up with the 250 and I'd stop, but when things were really bad financially, I had to go further. I had to push as hard as I could, and so I would be out 7 days a week, on top of my day job and my days with my son, because I never gave up a chance to spend a day with my son or spend time with my son. And that's something I've gotten asked for about pretty frequently, is, how did driving interfere with time with your son? And I always say it didn't. I
Yeah.
refuse to let it, because if I started skipping time with my son to go drive, what the hell was I doing all this for? So I went out, and between the day job time with my son, I would still sometimes clock 25, 30 hours a week behind the wheel.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's a lot of hours.
So it wasn't full time, but add on a day job on top of that. I was working, 60, 70, sometimes probably 80 hours a week.
So during that time, your day job was salary then, right? There was no opportunity for overtime or anything?
Yeah, no opportunity for overtime because it's a state job,
Okay.
and that they only authorize overtime during like really crazy stuff, hurricanes and things like that, when something really crazy happens. So that was not an opportunity to make more money. I do always say that I have a big advantage over what a lot of drivers put up with out there, is that I did have that backstop of the salaried job. I had health insurance through my job, and it was good health insurance. I had that backstop of the money from my job, where I always knew I was at least going to have this as a floor. But there were still times where the money just wasn't there. The money didn't add up, and I had to turn to kind of increasingly desperate measures to try to make ends meet. Whether that was driving more hours behind the wheel, whether that was, spending even more time out on a Saturday night. My charity rides sometimes became 2 or 3 charity rides, until 3 in the morning. Or as I turned to later on in the book, eventually at a certain point, I was so desperate for money, I started selling plasma, just to get any amount of extra money. And so, I was driving 5, 6 days a week, donating plasma twice a week, working a full time job, and still, being there every second that I could with my son. It was exhausting.
Jonathan, let me just say that, first of all, I really enjoyed the book. It took me about 5 days to find the time to start on it, but I read it in like a day and a half. I read pretty quick, and I love to read. Favorite. And I'm in a very similar position. I'm in a college town here in Bowling Green. We have Western Kentucky University. It's about 20,000 students. I've been through the divorce thing as well, so I know how that goes. I wasn't divorced when I started writing, but my wife was a teacher, so she was busy grading papers and doing things, and the kids were all college age or high school age, so they're doing their own thing. So I just kind of started, driving to make some, money maybe for a vacation or something. But talk a little bit, because I really enjoyed in the book how you talked about how they gamify the apps and how they suck you in and really kind of control and try to make you drive as much as they want you to.
Yeah, the gamification was something that I saw it while I was doing it, but I didn't have a word for it. And so when I finally learned that word, I looked at it and I went, oh my God, this is everywhere in the app. It's all over the place. So gamification is this concept of supplying you with little rewards to get that dopamine hit, or to keep it in the front of your mind as you're working, to bring it back to your attention. And the example I always like to give to people is, if you've ever gone on the App Store on your phone and downloaded some cruddy game on your phone, and then the next day you get a push notification on your phone that's like, hey, log in and get your login bonus. What they're doing with that is they're not just being nice, they're trying to keep your mind on that game so that you go play it. And if the more time you spend on it, the more they're going to sink their claws into you to keep it in the forefront of your mind. Well, Uber and Lyft do this as well. And they do it through all the emails and push notifications. Every time you get a little ding on your phone and it says, surge is heating up right now, what they're trying to get you to do is log on, because that's what they want more than anything, is they want you to be online and available all the time. And once you're online, the thing they want the least is for you to leave. Don't ever leave. Stay online all the time, even when there's no demand, because, hey, it's coming. They do this on the map nowadays, where you can see on the map the areas with the little $ symbols to try to tell you, oh, you should head over here. That's where the demand is. Or they'll show you the average hourly demand based on historical data, even if they happen to know on their end that there's no rides being called right now, because they're trying to get you to stay online. And it shows up everywhere in the apps. All those points that you earn as a driver that turn you from a blue to a gold to a, diamond and platinum tier driver, that's all gamifying it. There's a reason that rides during prime hours are worth 3 points instead of 1, because that way you feel like you're getting a bonus, even though you're doing the same work. And so it shows up in all kinds of insidious ways, but it also is used to hide information from you, because you'll finish a ride on Uber and you swipe to end the app. Well, what's the screen that it defaults to? It defaults to how many points you've earned. It doesn't default to the total amount of money you've made for the night. And that's because they want to keep you from looking at the total, because if you looked and saw that you'd made as much money as you were looking for, well, you might log off, and they sure don't want that. And so even when you log off, sometimes they've stopped doing this, thank God, because it drove me insane. You'd get this message that says, like, hey, by the time you were at this point in your night last week, you'd made more money than this. Don't you want to keep going? Don't you want to make what you made last week? And even if you had made more than you'd made last week, you'd get another message on the other side of it that would say, hey, you made more than you made last week. Don't you want to keep going and see how much you can make?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Because the goal is to make you be online and available at all times for all things. They're paying for an excess capacity, whether that capacity gets used or not. So that Uber would love for you to sit online on the app all day long and to accept every single ride that's offered to you. And that's what they push for in the apps. That's why your benefits from the different tiers that you're in start to drop away if your acceptance level gets too low. And I know that's different in different states for the way that they've been forced to change their business model. But during this period, especially when I was doing it, they wanted you to accept everything, and you'd better do it or your benefits were going to drop off. Back in the day when we all first started doing this, you couldn't see where you were going. You had no idea how much money you were making on each ride. You didn't know what you were picking up or where you were headed. It was a really controlling system.
So you felt that during that time, was it really getting you? Like, you felt that pressure? Because, like, for me, I'm in the kind of the same boat. Like, I have a W-2. It's not a 40-hour week, but it's flexible. And then I fill in rideshare to fill it in. But I never felt pressured by any of those. In fact, I turned all the notifications off, and to the point where I have a separate work phone now. So, like, if I'm not doing gig work, nothing pops up on my personal phone, just to keep that away. Because I agree, they bombard you with those kind of things. And I think all the apps are doing that. Facebook's trying to keep you on the app, Instagram, TikTok, they're all trying to do that. I personally didn't feel that it was drawing me back in. Even if it said I made more, I'm just like, well, whatever. But I can see being a full-time worker in absolutely needing this money. Like, if you didn't do it, you weren't going to pay rent, how that could manipulate you.
Yeah, and I talk about this in the book, that it was kind of amusing. The reason that the gamification stuck out to me so much and was so obvious to me is because there were only certain hours that I could do the work. So I was immune to their efforts to try to keep me online or to try to get me to log on at a time when I wasn't intending to drive. I was never going to get a ding on my phone and go, oh, sorry, kiddo, I'm going to drop you back off at your mom's and go drive. Like, that was never going to happen. And so every time they tried to do it, it made me mad, because I could feel them trying to manipulate me. Now, if you were single, if this was your full-time job, if you were, the sort of person who was really desperate for cash, if you're an immigrant who's new to the country, and Uber loves to target and draw in people who
Yeah.
are immigrants. That's their favorite target, is people with very few other options who are new to the country and who may not have a good sense of how bad a deal they're getting. Those people get those push notifications and they work.
Mhm.
They push to keep drivers online. And so oftentimes what they're trying to do is not always to try to get you online for another hour or 2 hours. But if they can get every driver to stick online for 25 or 30 minutes, longer than they intended to, or to log on, 10 or 20 minutes earlier than you intended to, times the number of drivers on the road, that's a lot of extra capacity for the companies. That's a lot of people who are suddenly online and available for rides.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. Just a little bit here and there and spread it all out, and then they get what they want. So
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate that both these companies, all these gig companies, they want as many people on their app as possible because it costs them nothing. Whether they have 10 people on in your city or they have 1,000, drivers on in their city, it doesn't cost them a penny. They want as many out there so these people will get picked up as quickly as possible. So they want to flood the market with as many drivers as they can.
The working conditions, because of the misclassification, calling you an independent contractor, the working conditions can get absolutely abysmal to the point where people start to leave and quit, and they don't care because they don't owe you anything. And as I put in the book, there's 100 other people walking in the door right behind you, ready to pull the lever on the slot machine and see if it'll spit some money out for them, not realizing that this is a casino and the house is going to win every time.
yeah. So a couple of questions we had in here, just kind of work related. What do you think about being an independent contractor over like an employee? Like I'm sure you still follow the news in Massachusetts. We're going to talk about tonight on our show. It's a little old, but they're paying them $32.50 an hour minimum wage and all the benefits and stuff like that. What is your opinion on that as far as, where do you stand on being independent and or, having these extra benefits?
So I've talked with a lot of people in person and online, and I understand that some drivers like the independent contractor status. They want to keep the independent contractor status. Um, and I understand where they're coming from, and I do. I completely understand why that appeals to them and why they want it. For me, we are doing all the work. The company's success is owed to us. And therefore, if we are the ones doing the work, all of it, at some point, this company doesn't exist without us. We are its employees. And I think calling us contractors is extremely misleading. And I think they're using that contractor status to avoid paying the sorts of obligations to us that are owed to us, whether that's workforce protection, whether that's unemployment insurance, whether that's health insurance, or whether that's wages. Because I was assaulted very brutally, and I write about it in the book. I was nearly beaten to death by a passenger who was pummeling me and throwing me against the concrete and slammed my head against the concrete. He nearly blinded me in one eye from the injuries that I sustained. And when I spoke with Uber's customer service the next day with their security incident team, they didn't care. They owed
Yeah.
me nothing. They had no obligation even to cover a trip to the hospital to get me checked out. And at the time, I had 70 some dollars in my bank account, which was less than, even with health insurance, my copay to go to the ER. So I could have gone home that night and I couldn't afford to go to a hospital, and I just went to sleep, you know. And if I had been bleeding into my brain and died in my sleep, Uber's obligation for that injury would have been nothing.
Right.
And I think when you look at these sorts of safety incidents that are happening with drivers, drivers in some countries have been robbed, shot, they've been killed. And the company gets to wash their hands and walk away from that. And I don't think that that's right, that a company that put you in the situation to do this sort of work should get to walk away from a pile of dead bodies and pretend like they're not responsible in some way for that situation.
The Gig Economy Podcast will be back after a quick break.
I'm Dan Heath. On the What It's Like to Be podcast, I ask folks about their jobs, like what keeps a TV meteorologist up at night.
When I'm at work and there's a tornado coming into town, my husband and my kids have to get into the tornado shelter without me.
What keeps a welder driven?
I never am satisfied. I always know I can do better.
And what keeps a hairstylist on her toes?
I know she likes that Holly Berry haircut, but she doesn't look like Holly Berry.
Find out on What It's Like to Be, wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, it's kind of I agree with you a little bit. I'm kind of in the middle. I think those protections should be there, but I also don't want another boss. I don't want to be locked out of the app like in New York City. You know what I mean? I want to be able to work when I want, but yeah, I do want some of those protections. I don't want to be deactivated unfairly. Mm-hmm. I want some help if I'm injured and stuff like that. But I think it's frustrating. I mean, anytime you get the government involved, and I'm not an anti-government guy, like I think it's helpful when it needs to be helpful, but I just feel like everyone's trying to, it just feels like we're just dipping into the pockets. You know what I mean? And I get it. Uber and Lyft, they're trying to get away with it. And it is it's not like you're a drywaller. I mean, I started out when I did this, I was like, well, I'm just like a drywaller. And then I more think about it. Well, I don't set my own prices for Uber and Lyft. You know what I mean? Like, if I was independent drywaller, I'd be like, nah, it's going to be $100, a sheet, or, I don't get to do that. So I'm with you on that. I'm with you. I just don't want to lose, like I said, what's happened in New York, which is an extreme thing because there's a lot of people there. So I wouldn't expect it to happen in Bowling Green or Grand Rapids. But
yeah, and I'm certainly sympathetic to the people who are having that struggle where they're trying to log on and they're locked out because there's too many people online and things like that. And there's been some talk, I know, of creating kind of a third status, whether you're not a W-2, but you're not a 1099, and maybe you're some other sort of third status. And I don't know if that's the solution. Maybe it is, but I do know that the way things are set up now is untenable. And then I think that's why you're seeing so many cities and groups of drivers push back. I don't think purely independent contractor is the right status. I think more is needed from the companies as an obligation to the people doing the work, whether that's through protections that are put in for people and we're all still considered contractors, but there are protections, whether that's, that we somehow end up as W-2 employees, which I don't think is where this will go, or whether that's some third status that, a bunch of lawyers and politicians get together and write into the law. I don't know where this ends. I can only talk about where I've been.
That's kind of my thought. It would be nice if we had kind of two categories. If you're, somebody like us that have a W-2 job, so we don't need the insurance, we don't need that kind of stuff, and we just want to work when we want to work, have that status. But if you're somebody who this is your full-time job and you need the benefits and stuff, but you're going to have to put up with being told, hey, you're going to have to work these hours, maybe, things like that. It would be nice to have those two choices.
I know Larry has said, and I probably would too, if they said, well, you can only work these hours. I'd be like, nope. I'm out. But I say that, and I've been doing Amazon Flex all summer. I'm a school bus driver, so I'm off in the summer, and I've been doing it every day. And they tell me I get to choose, these are the times they're offering, 6 p.m.
So there's still some flexibility there.
So it's still some flexibility, but I have to show up at 6 like I do my bus driving job. Like if I'm late, I'm in trouble. Same thing.
I think that may be sort of the compromise in terms of, always available versus them telling you is the time slot option. Yeah. And I believe it was the grocery delivery service. I can't remember if it's Shipt
Instacart
or Instacart. One of them had a system set up like that where you would choose to be online for these shifts.
Yeah, I think it was Shipt. Early on it was. I don't know if they still do that, but
I think that's a good compromise for people where you still get the flexibility of choosing a time slot, but it's not the sort of thing where they're going to dictate to you when you're online. And maybe that's the solution down the line, is that we end up with a system like that. I do know that what's happening in New York, where they're locking drivers out, is just horrendous. I can't believe that you would take someone in the middle of their, driving time and just lock them out
Right.
and basically just kick them off and be like, well, you're done.
Come back in 45 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're just doing that just to fight back what's going on there. I don't know why they just don't let them figure it out on their own. If they're not getting rides, then they're just going to go home. Like it'll work itself out. It'll work itself out. But so what? Maybe we talked about it earlier, but what made you decide to write the book? And are you like a writer anyways, or is this something that just inspired you to be like, you know what, I need to get this out because this sucks?
So how the book came to be is this really bizarre series of coincidences that I love telling this story. So at a certain point, right around, sometime 2018 or 2019, I'm deep in it. I'm driving 7 days a week and I'm exhausted perpetually. And I have somebody get in my car, and the first thing that you get from a lot of people is like, hey, tell me about the craziest thing that's ever happened. They want to hear your stories. And I was in the middle of telling them this story, and I had this vivid moment where I realized, oh, I have this other thing that happened that I had forgotten about. Another story about another person who had been in my car. And that, for me, triggered this moment of kind of existential crisis, because so much of my identity had gotten caught up in being a driver that I had kind of started to lose who I was as a person outside of the car. If I wasn't this driver, who was I? Because I was spending all my time doing it. And so I started to write these stories down. And at first I just opened up a Word document on a computer, and I just started putting bullet points, stories that I remembered. Hey, remember when this happened? Remember that guy? Remember this guy? Remember that guy? And by the time I got done recording everything I could remember, I had 4 pages of bullet points. And so what I decided to do was to start documenting stuff as it happened. So I started a Twitter account, which was originally called Uber Trips. Nowadays, it's called Ride Trips, ride_trips on Twitter. And I started, after every ride, you swipe to end the ride, and I would drive past them and I'd pull off and I would just type out a tweet, or I would use the voice typing a lot of times. So there's a lot of spelling errors. And I would just say, I used a fake name, and I would say, Sandra was going to the grocery store with her kids, but decided that they should just go home and get takeout, and I just put a star rating on it, 5 stars. That's what I gave them and what I thought of them. And I started doing this, and nobody was following me. I had 10 followers. I was just kind of screaming into the void. Right. But it was a way for me to remember that this stuff had happened to me, because it was important. It was a part of me. And at some point, there was an incident where a young lady in a wheelchair was turned away by 3 Lyft drivers in a row. And they left her on the side of the road with her wheelchair and her service animal, and she had taped it. It went viral. The video of her confronting the driver, saying, like, why won't you take me? And he says, because I don't want your dog in the car, and I don't want your wheelchair. I don't want to deal with your wheelchair. And he drives off and he leaves her. Well, I wrote a long thread on Twitter about handling disabled passengers, because I deal with a lot. I have weirdly had a lot of disabled passengers in my time doing this, whether it was people in wheelchairs. Tallahassee has an unusual number of blind people who have met up with me in my car. So I have driven blind people a lot. And, you talk to them, and to me, they're just like any other passenger. I've had service animals in my vehicle. I'm familiar with handling them. So I wrote this long thread about it. Somehow one of my 10 followers retweeted it, and it came to the attention of the author Neil Gaiman, who retweeted it. And next thing you know, because he had tens of, hundreds of thousands of people following him. Next thing you know, I had like 800 people following me every week doing this rideshare, posting these things.
Nice. Wow.
Well, then COVID hits. And at the start of COVID, at the very beginning of late February, early March, there was this sense of impending doom that we all had, that was like, this is going to be horrible. A lot of people are about to die, and there's nothing we can do about it. And I got in my car, I gave 4 rides, and it was all people going to bars and restaurants like the end of the world wasn't about to happen and no one was going to get sick. And it upset me so badly. I pulled over into a parking lot and I cried because I felt like I was watching people kill each other without meaning to. And I wrote that in a tweet. I wrote a 4 tweet thing where I said I pulled into a parking lot and I cried because these people are killing each other and they don't realize it. And I'm really worried because, I have a child that goes back and forth between me and his mom doesn't have the healthiest immune system. And I'm really worried that I'm out there doing this. I'm going to get sick and I'm going to give it to him and he's going to give it to her and it's going to kill her. And someday I'm going to have to look my son in the eye and explain to him why I needed this money badly enough that I killed his mother, which is a dramatic way of putting it, but it was how I felt at the time.
Yeah.
Well, I went home because I couldn't stand to be out anymore, and I went to sleep. And I woke up 4 hours later to my phone vibrating nonstop. And next thing you know, I had 28,000 people following me on Twitter.
Jeez.
And it's gone down some over the year, but it was that moment of kind of like viral fame. Well, I started telling stories on this Twitter thread about people that I had met. And every response that I got from people was, these stories are great. You should write a book about this stuff. So I started jotting stuff down and I mentioned that I had about, 10, 15 pages of stuff written down. And I got a DM from a guy on Twitter in London named Max Edwards, who worked for a literary agency. And he said, I'm not going to make any promises, but if you want to show me that 10 or 15 pages you got written down, I'll tell you if you've got something because I help people write and sell books. I'm a literary agent. Well, sure, Max. And I sent it to him. He got back to me the very next day. He said, there is something here. I want to represent you for it. I want to help. If you're serious, if you want to write a book about this, I will help you make that happen. And he did. We went through this long process of writing a proposal, pitching it to publications or to publishing companies. And we got picked up by Beacon Press, who liked the story. And then they gave me a year to write the book. And so I sat down and nights and weekends, whenever I had a free moment, I just tapped out, whether it was 2 or 3 or 5 or 800 words at a time. And I wrote the book you see in front of you.
Wow.
So it was a long, very strange journey to get there. But I like to think there was a lot of weird good fortune.
It's super cool that you use Twitter that way because it's like, what is Twitter? I mean, it's X now. I don't even remember.
I can't call it that.
I know.
Elon can try it once. It's never going to be X.
I know. And there's just not a lot of room to do anything, but what a great way to document stuff because it's like it's right there, it's always accessible, and then to go viral like that's super cool.
I'm very impressed by that. I don't use Twitter. I used to a little bit, but I do take pictures with a lot of my college passengers. I have an Instagram account called Lifting with Larry, and I'll take selfies with them and they they love taking pictures, so it's a lot of fun. But you mentioned
somewhere out there I'm sure I'm in a bunch of FSU Instagram accounts from taking pictures with people. I've never looked into it, but I'm sure there's pictures of me because every night when I go out, every Friday night I wear a Hawaiian shirt and people love the Hawaiian shirts. I tell them a funny story and I've seen people recording from the back seat as I tell stories. So I know I'm out there on
for sure.
Instagrams. No idea where any of it is though.
And so you mentioned earlier that we all have stories to tell. And before the show, we were kind of talking a little bit, and you said you had a story for us. So I've been waiting patiently. We've been waiting patiently, and we want to hear this story.
So this was a story. This is one of my favorite stories to tell people, and it was a story that I wrote up for the book. And it ended up, we cut it from the book because from a narrative perspective in the book, it didn't really serve any sort of purpose in the narrative of the book, but it is really, really funny. And it happened, I had just started, this was maybe 3 months in, 3-4 months in after I started. And I thought with the college students at FSU, I had kind of gotten the rhythm of how they were going to operate. They're very drunk. They're very pushy. They will say absolutely anything in front of you. They have no filter at all. So I thought I pretty much had this down. And then one night I got a call from a woman who I called Alexandria when I wrote this. Now, what her actual name is, I don't know. And she came up to the car. She was dressed like this is probably 10 11 at night. She looked like she was about ready to go clubbing, and she was dressed up. I'm talking heels, dress. She had the big hoop earrings that are real popular, and she was on the phone. Well, whoever she was talking to on the phone, she was talking to him in Spanish. And I don't speak any Spanish that you can't find on a Mexican restaurant's menu. So I had no idea what was going on, but she opened the passenger side door and sat down next to me, and she was screaming into the phone, just yelling at the top of her lungs in this very thick Miami accented Spanish, which is a very specific accent, that Miami accent. And she's yelling into the phone, ah, ta, 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 ta. And then she looks over at me, puts the phone on her chest and goes, hi, and then goes right back to yelling at the woman on her phone. And I don't know what they're talking about, but I do know she must be pretty upset, because it came out rapidly a lot of times that she was yelling, ah, da, 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 da. No, you listen, bitch. You listen, bitch. And then she would keep going in Spanish. My job was not to understand. My job is to drive the car. So I just swiped to start the ride, and she's not going far. She's literally going from one side of FSU to the other side over where there's some bars. So I'm just like, fine, I'll drive her and she can yell at this lady in Spanish. It's whatever. Whole ride, she's screaming at this woman. Spanish, Spanish, Spanish. No, you listen, bitch. More Spanish. So we start to get close to this bar called Potbellies in Tallahassee, which is a real famous bar for college students. And we're third in line at the red light. And all of a sudden, Alexandria sits up in the chair and she starts rolling the window down. Now, at this time, I drove a Hyundai Santa Fe when I was doing this at this time, which is an SUV. So keep that in mind, because the height of the vehicle matters in the story. So she rolls the window all the way down, and she gets up and she stands up out the window. And then she screams at a volume that you would normally reserve for like Viking war cries. She screams, I see you, you bitch! You can't hide from me! And then she fell out the window.
Oh.
She tumbled out the
goodness.
window. Like, she tried to jump out of the window, but she tumbled and fell into the street. And before I could do anything, because I put the car in park and looked, and before I could react, she was up and running. And she ran, and she grabbed this woman that was in the crosswalk going the other way and had her by the hair and just started going at it with her. I mean, fists and hoop earrings. She had a shoe in one hand that had come off in the fall, and she was decking this girl. I mean, they were going at it in the street, having a fist fight that was absolutely rowdy. And I realized as I sat there, it was the woman she'd been on the phone with.
Yeah.
She had called this ride specifically to go where this girl was and kick this girl's ass. And I'm sitting there and I'm trying to figure out what to do. So I just swipe to end the ride, because I can't figure out what else to do. And suddenly my back door opens, and I whip around, and I realize there's been a guy in the back seat the whole time. I had no idea he was there. She was so distracting with her yelling. I didn't even realize anybody else had gotten in the car.
Wow.
And this guy in like a, backwards baseball hat and a sports jersey, real frat boy type guy, looks at me through the window of the car. He's, half in, half out of the car. And he looks at me and he goes, I don't know either, man. And then he does this, just shrugs. And it looked exactly like the shrug emoji on your phone.
Yes.
I don't know either, man. And then he closed the door.
Probably
and
not the
walked
first time he had seen something like this.
And I just ended the ride, and the light turned green, and I kept driving. I already had my ping for the next ride. But as I'm pulling past the cross street where she's in the crosswalk, she and this other girl they each have a handful of each other's hair, and they're just beating the hell out of each other.
I can't believe a guy got
was
in.
The moment. Yeah, that part always kills me in the retelling is the fact I truly had no idea he was there.
Yeah, he must have got in. They must have closed the door at the same time, and then she's
Yeah.
hooting and hollering. So you're not, and he's probably like, yeah, she does this all the time in his head. So he's just like quiet as a
he's
mouse
used
back
to it.
there.
He's used to it. Yeah, that's what I tell everybody when they ask me about rideshare. I'm like, hey, every ride's an adventure. You don't know who you're picking up or where you're going to end up. It's just an adventure. Every ride.
Yeah. People ask me, what's happened, and I tell them I've had everything happen in my car except for two things. Nobody's ever pulled a gun on me, thank God. And number two, nobody's ever successfully had sex in my car. That doesn't mean they haven't tried.
Yep. No.
Yeah.
Know that well.
Yeah, for sure. So as we're wrapping up here, that you're a great storyteller, by the way.
Yes,
I really enjoyed that.
indeed.
Are you still doing any kind of gig work at all, or are you officially retired from that? Or
I do. So I go out and I still do what I call the Friday night ride along on Twitter, where I go out and I have set times that I go. I go from 7 to 11, and I go on Friday nights every other week, and I do a ride along thread with me where, I go out and I drive whoever I get, and I tweet about them as I meet them, and we get to, see and meet various people throughout Tallahassee, and it's great. It's a lot of fun, and a lot of people really enjoy it. So it's been a great way to teach people about what this is like, while also sort of showing them this sort of collective face of humanity that you get to meet while you do this. I call it the full rainbow of human behavior, because you see everything, absolutely everything. And, you get people that are really terrible, but you also get people that are in bad situations, and you get to do something good for them. And sometimes when those rides are over, I'll refund the ride back to them, because, I hate knowing that someone who's in a really bad situation spent their last $15 just to call a ride, and I'm going to make $5. I'd rather give them that $15 back and because they need that money more than I need $5.
Yeah, for sure. That's super cool. Well, I'm glad you're still driving. I feel like a lot of people that get out of it, they write a book, because we've interviewed, I think, one other guy, and they don't do any gig work anymore, but it's good that you still kind of have a pulse of what's going on, and people can follow along. Right. So obviously, is the book out? The book's out right by now, right? You can buy it.
Yeah, book's available now. It came out in May, so you can get a copy anywhere you can buy books, or if you want an ebook or an audio book, obviously you can get that. You can grab it on Amazon and download it for your Kindle. The audiobook is out. The guy who did the audiobook did a great job. So I'm super proud of all the opportunities that I've had, that I've gotten to do this. I've gotten to meet some really neat people and learn a whole lot about the publishing industry and how it works. So I'm a first-time author. I had never written anything before this, and I got to tell you, I really loved it, and it's not the last that people are going to see from me.
There's audio. I was hoping that you're such a good storyteller. Like that would have been cool if you. I kind of sometimes I like when the author reads it, but then sometimes they're terrible. And it's just like they insisted on it, and I was like, I don't know if I can get through this. I mean, it's a good story, but you suck as an like a storyteller. So I think I need to go back and buy it as audio. I really enjoy listening to audio portions of that. So, well, very cool. I will share. Just email me all your links.
I'll get all that to you, and give you a chance. If you go over on my Twitter, you can just go hit the search and search for anything that's the Friday night ride along, and I've got all kinds of stuff on there, as well as some old stories that I used to type up for people, including some really interesting people that I've met. Some of the strange and bawdier things that happen when you're out there on the road.
Well, yeah, I'm sure you had to cut some of them that were just too gross or too raunchy. It's like, I mean, I want to like have a fun in this book, but I also got to keep it a little bit of
Yeah. It's people ask me about cleaning fees all the time, and I get to tell them, the funniest thing for the longest time is nobody had thrown up in my car. And the first cleaning fee that I got driving for Uber was actually a young girl that I picked up from a bar at like 1 a.m, who peed herself in my seats. And so I hadn't had anybody throw up in my car, but I had someone piss themselves. And that was a really unpleasant experience. I got to tell you, if I hadn't been a father before that and who had done the diaper change thing, I probably would have been too much for me. At that point, all the squeamishness about bodily fluids was gone.
Yeah.
So. that Taco Bell parking lot that I parked
Yep.
in to clean it up, was the place.
Gotta love it.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thanks again, Jonathan. I really appreciate you. I'm glad that we finally connected. I'm glad I finally read the book, and I'm looking forward. I think I'm going to buy the audio. I think I want to listen to it. So check out his book. I think it's obviously worth reading. Don't listen to me. I'm just a slow
It's a
reader.
good book.
Buy the
It's a good
audio
book. It's a good read too. You'll get into it.
If nothing else, it's worth picking up for the first time someone actually did throw up in my car, which, because it's me, it had to be as weird as possible. It involves a middle-aged housewife who's naked by the end of the story. So
I mean,
There you go.
that would tell
That's
me.
not going to draw you in. I don't know what it is.
This podcast is produced and edited by Hey Guys Media Group. Want to start a podcast? Check out heyguysmediagroup.com.